Hey, everybody, and welcome to another edition of our online class. I'm actually recording this on Thursday morning, and I'm going to send it out as soon as I get done, so you'll have today to look at it. Just a couple of things I want to do today. It'll be another relatively short edition. I do want to take some time to go over the midterm and give you the study guide for that. And I'm going to talk all about that. That's something you're going to need to do over the weekend, in addition to some reading for Monday. But that's going to be the main assignment, so to speak. Then I want to go over your excellent fairy tale analysis that I compiled and I have posted on Canvas. And again, you're not literally responsible for these for the midterm, but I think it would be very helpful to kind of read through them because I think, you know, putting all your answers together, I think might be very helpful in helping you prepare for the midterm, even though I'm not going to ask you specifically about what anybody wrote in a particular homework quiz answer. Um, the presentations are another matter, which I'll talk about in a minute. But anyway, we'll go over the fairy tale answers. And then I also, the reason I waited until this morning to do this video is because I wanted to compile the answers to your folktale analysis. And I wanted to share those with you today before the midterm, because again, I think they might be a handy way of you preparing for the midterm as well. So those are basically the things I want to cover today. Next week, I will go over the midterm on Monday and also talk a little bit about the final paper. And then we're going to get into our next major genre, which is fantasy. And to preview things a little bit, next week, we're going to do Lion, the Witch, and the Ward. I'm sorry, we're going to do Charlotte's Web first, and then Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So if you want to start reading ahead, that's what's coming up in the next week or so. All right, let's start by going over the homework for today. And again, all of this is posted on Canvas. All right, so here's what's due. And it's mainly, as I said, the midterm that you're going to be taking. So I do want you to watch this lecture. And this is the lecture for July 11th. And reason I paused is I forgot to jot down the numbers in the sequence for today. So do that again. So there will be the midterm exam that'll be due by midnight on Sunday by email. And again, include the numbers in the sequence for this video to get credit for the midterm. So it's just like you do for every homework assignment, you'll do the same for the midterm. So on your midterm at the top, put the numbers in sequence. And the first number today will be 8, number 8. Okay, so here's how we're going to conduct the midterm. And then in a little bit, I'm going to go over the midterm preview. This worked pretty well last year. Obviously, in a online class, it's not quite the same as taking an exam in class in person. Usually in an hour and 15-minute session in class. And usually when students take this exam in class, it usually takes them about an hour, give or take. Some students take a little less time, students take a little more time. But I do give them the entire 75-minute period to do the exam. Now, I can't monitor you time-wise as such, and I know you all have different schedules and so on. That's one of the reasons you're taking an online class. So this is how we're going to do it. I'm going to post the midterm exam on Canvas at midnight on Saturday. And I will leave the exam up until midnight on Sunday. So again, you'll have all day, so you can set aside a time during Sunday to take the midterm exam and then turn it into me by email. And again, with the numbered sequence for this video. All right, so again, I'm not timing the exam as I would in an in-person class. But what I will do, what I am going to do, is at midnight on Saturday, when I put up the midterm, I'm also going to unpublish all the relevant files in Canvas that have any relationship to anything on the midterm. So it's not an open book, open notes, open Canvas type of exam. Okay. Uh, it's the only way I knew of to kind of make it fair as compared to what students in an in-person class have to do. So when they come into class to take the exam in 75 minutes, they just have a couple of sheets of paper in front of them. They don't have their books open, they don't have their notes ready, they don't, you know, they don't have access to Canvas in class. So this is the only way I could think of that kind of levels the playing field a little bit. So how you decide to study for the exam based on those restrictions is kind of up to you. But again, uh, during that 24-hour period while you have to take the exam, you will not have access to any of the files, any of the articles, um, anything. So uh, that's the restriction. That's that's the one thing I can impose upon you that might be close to what I would do in a regular classroom situation. All right. It says refer to the midterm study guide for the format, and I'm about to go over that in a minute. Uh, one of the things I mentioned, I think, in the very first day of class, and I'll remind you of again, there have been some articles in the packet and then also in the Canvas files that I've assigned throughout the first 3 weeks of class. And we haven't talked about any of those critical articles, but you are still going to be responsible for some of those. So hopefully you've been keeping up with the reading of those. Otherwise, you'll have a lot of reading to do over the weekend before you do the midterm. So as it says here, pay particular note of the articles in the packet that you're responsible for. Also, I have now posted, and you'll see them with all the assignments. I have now posted the 2 picture book presentations by students that we've had. And I've also posted the 2 presentations that fall under the myth, fairy tale, folktale presentations. So please read those. You are responsible for those. There will be a question on the midterm about the student presentations. Okay. So, and all 4 have been very good. And in comparison to the other in-person class that usually has like 30 people in it, you guys are kind of coming off easy. You only have like 4 of these to read, but they're all very good. But again, there will be a midterm question on the presentation. So make sure you read the student presentations. And both groups are now posted on Canvas for you to look at. All right, so that's the main assignment for homework for the weekend, is to prepare for and take the midterm. There are a couple of other things I'd like you to do in preparation for Monday. I will go over the exam answers on Monday. Uh, I don't know that I'll have the exams graded by Monday, by the Monday video, but I will go over the answers. And again, it's very important that you turn in your midterm by midnight on Sunday. Otherwise, it'll be considered late and I will not accept it. All right, so I'll go over the midterm answers so you have a pretty good idea how you did on it. And then probably later on Monday, if not sooner, I will send to you by email the grade you got on the midterm. And so you'll know exactly how you did. Then, as I said, we're going to start looking at fantasy next week. So in preparation for that, also before Monday's video, I would like you to read the file in Canvas called Fantasy Notes, and then also look over in Canvas the file called Final Paper Notes and Topics, because I do want to take a little bit of time on Monday to assign or explain and assign and prepare you for the final paper, which will be due the very last day of class. Okay, I thought this would be a good day to do it because we're kind of right at the end of the first half of the semester and taking the midterm, and now we're going to transition into fantasy. So please read those things in the Canvas. That won't take you that long. And the fantasy notes are starting the second half of the semester, so there's nothing on fantasy in the midterm. We're just moving ahead now. Okay. And so if you have any questions about the midterm, please, email me. Well, really before Saturday at midnight, because after that, I'm going to post the midterm. And like I said, you'll have all Sunday to do that. All right, so that's what's due over the weekend. Excuse me. All right, I ask you to look this over, and I will go over it as well today officially. Here is the midterm study guide. And what it will be comprised of, and also remember too, this is worth 20% of your final grade. So one thing to note, I post the grades on Canvas, and so far you've gotten grades for each of the different quizzes you've done. A couple of you have gotten grades for the presentation that you did. Most of you still have your presentations to do. But please remember that the grades are weighted. So the midterm exam and the final exam comprise 40% of your final grade. So if you want to break it down, this one exam is worth 20% of your final grade. All right, it'll be set up in a series of 8 short answer questions, not essay questions as such, but I usually say they're the kind of questions, most of them will be what I call questions that ask you to give a major topic or a major concept of the course and then apply it to something that we have read or talked about. So I call them sort of application type questions. All right, so a fair question might be, I don't know, what are 3 classical archetypes in the Hunger Games and how do we see them in the story? So you'd have to know what archetypes are, and then you'd have to know enough of the story of the Hunger Games to be able to answer that question. So a number of the questions will be along those lines, or if I were to bring up a literature term, and say, what are some examples of symbolism in the Hunger Games? Give 3 symbols in the Hunger Games and tell me what they represent. That's an application type question. So you'd have to know what symbols are, obviously, and then you'd have to be familiar enough with the story to be able to explain 3 symbols that you see in the story. So a number of the questions will be what I call application questions. And most of these, by the way, can be answered in a few sentences. Like I said, I don't consider them essay questions. Answer the questions, be concise, but answer the question fully. I'll also point out that I do try to give partial credit for answers. So let's say I ask you, what are 3 major points that Jones makes in the article, How Disney Damages Fairy Tales? And let's say you can only remember 2 of those. At least give me the 2, and I'll give you credit for that. If you didn't get the third, I'll knock off some points, but you won't get a 0 for that question. All right. That's the other kind of question you're liable to see. Like I said, I have assigned some articles over the course of the semester that I wanted you to read that corresponded to what we were talking about in class. So, a fair question would be to ask you, I would refer to a title of the article and then maybe ask you something along the lines of, what are 3 points that are made in this particular article by Jones or whoever? And I might ask you also to comment on them, whether or not you agreed or disagreed with the points. So in order to answer that question, you have to be familiar with the article. And that's a good way to study for those articles, which would be to read over the article and say to yourself, okay, what do I think are some of the main points that this author is making, just in case Shank asks me about it. Okay, so 8 short answer questions, 10 points apiece. The exam will be worth technically a total of 80 points, but what I do is after I figure out the total you got right out of 80, then I transfer it into something out of 100. So it's a 100% kind of thing. So let's say you got a 75 out of 80. that I think would translate, if my math is correct, don't judge me, but I think that would be like a 93 or 94% out of 100. Okay, and that's the grade you'll get. So you get a 94 for that, or 93, whatever it turns out to be. Okay, so that's how I figure that. Um, Again, short answer, examples applying concepts to specific works. Um, you'll see a number of questions like that. And like I said, the other kind of question you're liable to see is to summarize and respond to the selected articles. I'm not going to ask you to be responsible for every article that I had you look at. Well, I'll go over which ones you're responsible for in a minute. Okay, so this is the kind of stuff that we've covered in the first 3 weeks of class, and kinds of things that we have focused on, and the kinds of things that I think you should be responsible for. As far as introductory material, know some of the general values and benefits of literature for children. You know, we've been going back to that again and again and again. It's kind of been our Bible kind of thing. You know, it's the kind of criteria that we judge every work of children's literature on. So be familiar with that. That's a Canvas file. Be familiar with some of the trends in children's literature, and that's in packet page 15. I would look over your literature terms. Again, just in case I were to ask you to, give me an example of a few literature terms in a fairy tale we read, or a folk tale we talked about, or Hunger Games, for example. Be familiar with the different ages and stages. So if I were to ask you a question about age appropriateness, if I were to ask you, what age and grade do you think this particular work might be best suited, you'd be able to give me a reasonable answer. So if you said, well, I think this would be great for 10 to 12-year-olds, then you would know enough about, 10 to 12-year-olds to give me an adequate response to that. Be familiar with the reasons why books are banned and challenged. You may very well get a question about that. And then also just general criteria on evaluating children's fiction, page 38 in the packet. All right, then we started to go specifically to the genres, and we started with picture books, obviously. Be familiar with the different criteria we use to evaluate picture books, and you'll see that on page 39 in the packet. Be familiar with the different elements of art and also the different styles of art. And there's a particularly good file in Canvas dealing with the different styles of art. So if I were to ask you a question like, what are, 4 different styles of art in children's literature, you'd be able to come up with those. There are more than 4, but you'd be able to come up with at least 4 of those. All right, then we moved on to myth, folktale, and fairy tales. Be familiar with the different classical archetypes. Also be familiar with the notes I gave you about myth in the Canvas file. And then to back that up, there are a couple of really good articles in the Canvas packet. Seeger starting on 70 and Campbell starting on 74, that also supplements the hero myth in mythology. All right, so but be particularly knowledgeable. I can't talk. Be particularly know your classical archetypes. All right, and then there's a file in Canvas called "What is a folk tale?" So know basically the difference between a folk tale and a fairy tale. We talked a little bit about that in class the other day. And then specifically about the Hunger Games, we went over the different themes that we see in the Hunger Games. I looked that over. One article that I assigned that, again, we didn't talk about in class, but I want you to look over for the midterm, is there was an article from Goodreads that was actually very critical of the Hunger Games, and you'll find that on 105 to 106. Review that. So if I were to ask you, what are some of the criticisms of the Hunger Games we see in the Goodreads article, you'd be able to answer that question. And then as far as fairy tales, I gave you a lecture, and this is in Canvas. What are the different characteristics, conventions, and motifs that we see in fairy tales? In other words, what are the kinds of things that we see in fairy tales that make them fairy tales? All right, before I forget, let me give you another number. How about 9? Number 9. Okay, so that would cover Hunger Games, fairy tales. As far as the fairy tales go, I ask you to read a number of examples in the Golden Book fairy tales. These are the ones that you should probably review. I'll give you one little note right now. We're going to talk a little bit more about your answers to the fairy tales in a minute. But I am not going to, I'll tell you right now, I am not going to ask you a question about Beauty and the Beast or Cinderella or Little Red Riding Hood. Okay. So review the other ones in the Golden Book. And the reason I say that is, first of all, a number of you did that, one of those three, or maybe two of those three for your homework 30-point quiz. And the other thing is, those are such well-known fairy tales that you wouldn't have had to even read the Golden Book collection to know that story or know those stories. So I'm kind of testing you on, did you read the other ones in the fairy tale collection? Maybe the ones that aren't as well known, but are just as good examples of fairy tales as the big three, Cinderella, Beauty and the Beast, and Little Red Riding Hood. So I'm not going to ask you about those. And I'm not going to, I don't want you to use them as examples because they're well done and well known. And so I'd rather you give me other examples besides those. So make a note of that as you're studying. And finally, I do want you again to read the four, it turned out to be four total presentations, two for picture books and two in the myth, folktale, fairy tale, because there will be a question about that. And obviously if you're one of the four people who have turned in presentations, when that question pops up, I guess this should go without saying, but I'll say it anyway. You can't talk about your own presentation because obviously you're an expert at your own presentation. So you'll have to write about or talk about somebody else's. So as it says here, presenters cannot pick their own to write about. All right, and then finally, as I said, there's any number of packet articles that I've had you read to correspond with what we were talking about in class. And the four that I want you to review, two of them have to do with the Hunger Games. One is by Tahir, titled Katniss Everdeen is My Hero. Another one, I'm not sure there was an author listed there, but it's titled 5 Lessons in Human Goodness in the Hunger Games. So look those over. If I were to ask you what are the major points of either of those two articles, you'd be able to tell me. The Jones article deals with how Disney damages fairy tales and historical folklore. So a fair question would be, what are 2 or 3 ways that Jones says that Disney damages fairy tales? So you'd be able to answer that. And then one that I realized that I had not assigned, but is very important, the one by Sparks called Useful Dangers of Fairy Tales. Read over that article and be able to summarize its main points if I were to ask you about that. And most importantly, most important advice I can give you is stay alive. You can do it. I can tell by the nature and the quality of your answers to the homework so far that everybody's pretty much on board with what we've been doing so far. Most of you have been able to keep up with what we're doing. And so I don't envision you having any real issues with the midterm. Like I said, in class, when students take it in class, usually takes about an hour, give and take. And again, no open book, no open notes. But again, I can't monitor you uh, like I would in a classroom situation. This is the best I can do. But I even considered not giving you a midterm, just giving you a final, some big final that covered everything throughout the 7 weeks. But I decided last year to go ahead and give a midterm, and I decided again this summer to do the same, and it worked out pretty well. So again, this is your midterm study guide. If you have any questions about this, let me know before Saturday at midnight so I can answer any questions. Because like I said, Saturday at midnight, I am posting the midterm exam and I'm unpublishing everything else. So there you go. All right. Uh, let's talk a little bit about your answers to the fairy tale analysis. And again, I'm not going to ask you anything specifically on the midterm about what students wrote about in the different fairy tales. But I think, if you read these, I'm not going to go over them all word for word. There are a few things I've highlighted that I wanted to comment on each that I thought you did a really nice job on. But I think it would still be kind of a good idea to kind of read through them, uh, and it might end up being an answer to a midterm question, even though again I'm not making you responsible for each other's answers to these questions. So let's take a look at those. All right, and I ask you, uh, what are some of the common elements running through these stories? What are some of the common themes? Did you think there was one like best example? And it's interesting, I got different answers to that. Uh, some of them overlapped, of course. And then also, I think the interesting well, they were all interesting questions. Come on, I came up with them, so of course they're interesting. But I thought the most interesting question uh, that I found your answers to be very interesting were, the criticisms, the ones on question 4 that ask you if some of them were too dated or problematic. And to be quite honest, some of them are. Uh, that's what you have to deal with when you're talking about literature that goes way, 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 way back, like folk tales and fairy tales and myths. Kaylin did a really nice job of going through the common elements and where they're found. You can take a look at that. Um, Kaylin thought that the Frog Princess was maybe the best example. It had a lot of the different qualities and characteristics we look for in fairy tales, um, for a lot of good reasons there, a lot of good examples there. But I, again, found her answer to number 4 particularly interesting. Some of them may be too graphic for a young audience. The little girl's feet being cut off in Kit in The Enchanted Cat, for example. I mean, that's disturbing. There's no getting around that. Also, the idea that pretty much every story ends up with the girl, getting married off to the prince. Sometimes the girl is very young, which is also very problematic. And then also the evil stepmother sibling archetype is problematic. Uh, and again, that's something I kind of pointed out the other day. But it saves time in plot development and backstory. The stepmother shows up and kids immediately know, well, she's up to no good kind of thing. And it's unfair to all the stepmothers in the world who love their kids and do a wonderful job raising them. Grace had some interesting comments too. She thought that Sleeping Beauty might have uh, the most qualities that might make it the best example. But again, I thought her comments on the dated aspects of these stories were particularly interesting. Many of the stories in the Golden Book must be approached through a critical lens. Uh, and she was thinking in particular about their physical appearance and moral character and how the two are equated. How you look is a determinant of what kind of character you are. And then she brought up a interesting book that I want to check out. Uh, the physical appearance that diverges form the norm that is often used as a punishment for, or else to foreshadow the moral corruptness of a character. So again, beauty is good, ugly is bad, or not even to say ugly, but somehow less attractive is bad or evil. While the historical and literary significance of these stories shouldn't be discounted, we should be careful not to perpetuate harmful stereotypes by conflating physical appearance and moral character uncritically. And boy, I couldn't have said that better myself. So we see that in a lot of stories too. There's no question about that. Lauren uh, talked about how we see a lot of similar messages, lessons, and morals in the story. Uh, and she listed some of those. Uh, and again, she makes some rather critical 21st century analysis type comments that I think need to be done on these stories that are many, many centuries old. This message supports modern day victim blaming of rape and sexual assault survivors. I think Ponsat's translation of the king and queen's reaction to the curse, in addition of the ogress's plot arc, shed light on a different message about controlling what we can. We cannot guarantee that bad things won't happen. We can control how we react, find safety, and find help to start healing. This is a far more constructive message when trauma happens to people, but especially children. Oftentimes, people spiral into the anxiety of wanting to never experience this again. This keeps people held looking back on their trauma constantly instead of processing it healthily and taking a proactive outlook on their life. Childhood is traumatic, and children need help learning how to navigate this. And again, what an excellent point that is. And she has some wonderful summaries of some of the other stories too. And then, again, I was really impressed by this analysis. Thumbelina has a lot of issues. Ableist, pedophilic, and misogynistic. And I'm not going to read all of this for you. I encourage you to read all of this. I couldn't agree more. I mean, this is the kind of thing we have to take into account. So very well done on that. Jenna did a nice job of kind of listing the different kinds of characteristics and motifs we see in the stories, the vague setting in the time period, good versus evil, right versus wrong, talking animals. We see the three convention in a lot of stories. And again, some common motifs include the evil stepmothers, love at first sight, mysterious woods and castles, the happily ever after. So that was a good outlining of that. She liked the wild swans. She liked it, but she also had a criticism of it. It is a dated story. There are several mentions of praying in this tale. While this isn't necessarily inappropriate, times are much different now, and praying isn't necessary for someone to be deemed a good-hearted, virtuous person. Also, the relationship between Lisa and the king is highly inappropriate. She's 15 years old, marries the king who finds her in the woods. While the story doesn't specify how old the king is, one can assume that he is of adult age. So basically, we're talking about underage relationships here. So again, under a critical eye, a critical 21st century eye, a number of you found some rather compelling issues with these stories, and I was glad to see that. Irali did a nice job. He liked Cinderella as his best choice, and he admits that there are some stories in the collection that might be too scary. Little Red Riding Hood, Hansel and Gretel, etc., etc. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but there are two different versions of Little Red Riding Hood. One in which, I guess the one we know more today, because the ending has been Disneyfied, but one ending is the big bad wolf eats up Little Red Riding Hood, and then the woodsman shows up with an axe and cuts the wolf open, and Grandma and Little Red Riding Hood pop out. But there's the other version in which the wolf eats Little Red Riding Hood, the end. And it's kind of set as a very disturbing, cautionary tale about being careful about the wolves out there in your lives. So it kind of shows how, over time, certain versions of stories change to meet, different sensibilities as we mature as people. Emma, Beauty and the Beast, was her favorite as perhaps the best example. She mentions a modern problem that arises in fairy tales is the ultimate prize that a young girl can win a husband. I mean, that's the happy ending, right? what does she want? Well, she wants a man, and she wants to be happily married. She wants a prince to come and take her away, happily ever after. Um, the one that struck out the most to me was the Wild Swan, again, mentioning the very young princess. Um, but he has clearly taken her against her will, believing her to be too wild to know what was best for her. Okay. So there is that issue in that story. And you picked that out. Very good. Corinne, Beauty and the Beast was her favorite as a good example. And again, uh, I'm not going to ask you about Beauty and the Beast. What did I say? Beauty and the Beast, Cinderella, or uh, Little Red Riding Hood, because those are ones that are so universally known that I want to move past those. So look over the other ones in preparation for the midterm. Tayera talked about how a lot of them had similar themes, including Puss in Boots. Um, Gabby liked Beauty and the Beast as the best example. Um, she had a little bit different spin, uh, just so we're not totally being critical of this collection and some of the examples in it. She said she was actually pleasantly surprised that there wasn't that much of the whole damsel in distress kind of thing. Many of the stories, she points out, the girls are actually the protagonist, or at least function as an important help to the male protagonist. So it's, I guess it's nice to point that out too, uh, just so we don't bash these stories. Um, she does say they're unrealistic. And in fact, you know, this is something that happens to all of us. I mean, we grow up with fairy tales where everything works out in the end. And then as we get older, you know, we begin to realize that that doesn't always happen. And we have to adjust to that and, you know, outgrow fairy tales, at least to a certain extent. Uh, but she says, I think the fairy tales we studied at least are good examples of tales that have stood the test of time and still can be read and enjoyed by kids today. So that's encouraging. Um, Haley did a nice job of kind of listing some of the conventions that we see and the stories that we see them in. And her favorite, again, was Beauty and the Beast. So again, a number of these were mentioned and over and over again. And nice job, you guys. So again, you might want to review this and look them over in a little bit more detail. I kind of scanned some of these, some of the points I wanted to focus on, but it might be a nice way to sort of study for any question I might ask you about the fairy tales in the collection of the Golden Book. Okay, and the last thing I wanted to cover is your answers to the folktale analysis. So let's do that. And I was kind of surprised. I don't know if I was pleasantly surprised, but a number of them were mentioned several times. You know, and I gave you that big long list of, you know, YouTube videos. So I thought, boy, I'll probably get like 20 different answers, but a number of them keep coming up again and again. And I'm not sure if it's because they were the most readily available or maybe you know, what the reason was, but a number of them were repeated more than once, and including, what was the one that was really, I was surprised. Yeah, Urashima. A number of you uh, chose to share that, and I was very interested in that choice. Uh, Gabby did How the Tiger Got His Stripes, and I won't read her complete analysis. I'll just jump to the fun part, and you can read the rest of what she has to say if you think it might help you study for the folktale part of the assignment in the midterm. But I just want to jump to the important stuff, which is the two-line rhyme. So her assessment of how Tiger got his stripes, and again, a lot of folk tales are origin stories. You know, how did this happen? You know, how did the tiger get his stripes? How did the leopard get his spots, et cetera, et cetera. So be grateful for what you have. Don't envy and don't gripe. or you may regret what you get, like the tiger got his stripes. All right, all right. And then she did Paul Bunyan, famous American uh, folk tale. And her rhyme was, the legend of Paul Bunyan and his ox named called Babe used their strength for good and helped America take shape. Close enough, close enough. This isn't easy to do. That was probably the most difficult part of this assignment, wasn't it, to come up with a two-line rhyme? But it's interesting. These can be very effective, especially for kids. How do you remember a story? Well, you come up with this rhyme in your head, and then if you have the rhyme, then you'll remember the story. So there was method in my madness. It wasn't just to embarrass you. Uh, uh, Yanega was mentioned a number of times, which I thought was very interesting. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Yanega. This is Jenna's. And here's her two-line rhyme. Actually, she had two of them. Yanega ran away from her father, who's the king, because he didn't want her putting on a wedding ring. Then Yanega met reality, and now they're sitting in a tree, defying the patriarchy. It sounds like a song. All right, that was clever. That was pretty good. And then she did Urashima. And again, a number of you did this story. Here's her two-line rhyme for that. The turtle in which Urashima saved rewarded him for the way he behaved. The rules of the box he need not remind. Curiosity corrupted him, so youth left him behind. All right, that's really pretty good. I hope you guys didn't spend hours on the two-line rhyme. It's like you got the assignment done in 20 minutes, and it's like, crap, I got to do this damn two-line rhyme. Kaylin also did Urashima. Here's her rhyme to remember. Treat turtles kindly, but make sure to ask questions, because obeying blindly could be untimely. Okay, I'm going to give that one the benefit of the doubt, but it does sums up the story pretty well. And then she did also The Man Who Never Lied, which obviously is a fantasy and a fairy tale. Like to see that in politics sometimes. I don't think we ever see that. Anyway, she summarizes the story really well. You all did a wonderful job of analyzing the plot and themes, et cetera, et cetera. So I read these over. It might be a good way to prepare for the midterm. But here's her rhyme to remember. His words were trusted near and far. Despite the king's trickery, he stood boy, it would help if I could read these. His words were trusted near and far. Despite the king's trickery, he stood proud and tall. Yeah, okay. Far and tall. All right, but it does summarize the story well. Grace also did Urashima. Here's her two-line rhyme. Into the sea went Urashima to be thanked for his doing good. But too long did he stay, and his life slipped away, learning that to accept such reward he never should. That gets me, that gets an A. That's pretty good. And then she also did The Legend of Wisa Kajak. All right. North American folktale. And here's her two-line rhyme. Together they built a canoe that traveled the great flood blue, looking for earth on which to live. One by one they tried until the otter did and died, realizing toward the greater good was the most worthy gift to give. Very nice. Very good. Fox and the Crane might be one that you would have been familiar with even before doing this assignment. The fox and the crane used their brains so they could eat together with no pains. Sometimes others may need something of which you did not think, and this you should heed. The starfruit tree, also mentioned here. Um, and again, one of the things I liked about uh, the assignment is that hopefully you kind of looked these over and said to yourself, oh, I'd like to read a Vietnamese folktale. I like to see what that's like. Because, we're all familiar with the American folktales and maybe some of the other folktales from other countries, from the Western world. But it's nice to, be exposed to stories from other cultures as well. Here's the one on the star fruit tree. The raven sings his song. It is not very long. If you try to satisfy your greed, you'll have nothing left you need. Very good. Lauren did the goat who ate tigers. Keep calm like the goat and remember, stand up for yourself, send foxes and tigers running in fear of being dismembered. A little disturbing maybe for kids, but there you go. At least it fits the story. Again, she also did the star fruit tree. Be like D and reject greed. Don't sink like Hugh, because the raven won't give you a redo. All right. And then also Princess Yanega was mentioned again by Haley. Princess Yanega wanted to go, but her father said no. So she left to fall in love and watched her new kingdom grow. Nice. All right. She also did the star fruit tree. Like I said, a number of these were done multiple times. Hugh and his wife took until they became terribly greedy. Dee and his wife remained humble, so the raven graced them sweetly. All right, not quite a rhyme, but it's good. It works. And stone soup may be one that you might have been familiar with before. Uh, nice analysis of this. And then here's her two-line rhyme. I'm sorry, this is Emma now, or Emma, I'm sorry. When you're worried about what you haven't got, you'd be surprised how little it takes to fill one pot. That summarizes it beautifully. That's wonderful. And then she also did the folktale Cuckoo, a Mexican folktale. And here's her two-line rhyme. Birds of a feather may be what you're seeking, but birds who are different are still friends worth keeping. So bravo. Again, it's not easy to do that. It sounds like it'd be easy, and then when you set out to do it. But I think this would be a nice little trick, especially for kids, how to learn. I mean, you might even try this for the midterm. I don't know. Summarize your studies into two-line rhymes. It'll help you remember stuff. But anyway, I was enlightened and also entertained by your folktale analysis. And I encourage you again to read those in a little bit more detail because you guys did a really nice job on that. Let me give you another number. Boy, I've been kind of lax in the numbers today. How about 12? That's the third number, number 12. All right. The last thing I wanted to share with you, just as a FYI, when I first started teaching the class, it's been like almost 25 years ago now. There was a series of videos that came out. I think they were shown on TV first, and then they became videos. And back then it was like VHS. That's how old we're talking. This is like the late 80s, early 90s. But they were called Wishbone storybook tales. And basically what they were, and I'll share this with you now, because I recently I hadn't heard about them for many, many years. I used to use them in class. In fact, I used to bring the VHSs and put it in the portable TV and we'd watch them. Because they were so good. And I think they still hold up, even though they're some, 30 years old now. But I was so happy to see that recently somebody collected these on YouTube and made almost like a channel out of them. And so I wanted to share this with you. You'll see this in YouTube. And they're called Rabbit Ears Productions. And they were made over a course of several years, like I said, in the late 80s, early 90s. And what's really cool about them is that they usually use the original art and illustrations of the picture books for these. And they're myths, they're folk tales, they're fairy tales. Some of them are like religious stories. Some of them are from the stories from the Bible. Uh, so they use the original illustrations and kind of animate them in a way. But what's really cool about it is they took some of the most prominent actors of the time to narrate these stories. And then usually there was musical accompaniment, also by really prominent musicians of the time. So it was really a prestigious uh, uh, program that attracted a lot of great talent of the time. Sadly, a lot of the actors have passed away. Actually, one of my favorites is John Henry, the great American folktale. And I don't see that anywhere. Maybe it's somewhere in YouTube and you can catch it. But it was narrated by the wonderful Denzel Washington, and the music was provided by the late great bluesman B.B. King. And the combination of the music and Denzel's narration is one of my favorites. And I don't see it here, but I'll just scroll down. They did Three Billy Goats Gruff. Actually, I'm going to come back to this in a minute. One of my other favorites, you got to check this out. It's the story of Pecos Bill, narrated by Robin Williams. And, you know, as you can imagine, Robin Williams does some ad-libbing throughout the whole thing. It's a lot of fun. Michael Palin of Monty Python fame does Jack and the Beanstalk. Jack Nicholson did one, how the rhinoceros got his skin and how the camel got his hump. So two kind of short stories in one there. Meg Ryan did Little Red Riding Hood. Glenn Close did Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Robin Williams did another one. I have not seen this one. I want to check that out. Fool and the Flying Chip. Rip Van Winkle by Angelica Houston. Holly Hunter did The Three Little Pigs. You get the idea. Jack Nicholson did another one, going back to 86, The Elephant's Child. And all these run about a half hour, give or take, as you can see. Max von Sydow did East of the Sun, West of the Moon. Starting to lose the thread here, but Sigourney Weaver, Peach Boy, Ben Kingsley, if you're familiar with him, great actor. Danny Glover did How the Leopard Got His Spots. And I'm so glad that these are now on YouTube. So again, it's particularly if you're education majors, or if you just want to entertain your kids, or this is a great way to introduce folk tales, fairy tales, and myths. And if I had been aware that these were on YouTube, and again, this is relatively recent, I would have put them in our Canvas and made them available to you before now. Meryl Streep, The Velveteen Rabbit. Denzel Washington, Anansi. Or any more on this thread here? Doesn't look like it. So I'm going to go back to the top, because if you click on this one,
Do it all with ad-free listening, song downloads, and more.
We don't need the music there. But there's also a nice little list here, easy to click on. Also kind of describes who narrates it. They don't give the musical credit. And again, a lot of what makes these things really good is the music. By the way, let me give you one more number, 15. So we're only going to have 4 numbers today, 15. And again, some of these I've already mentioned here. I checked out this John Henry. This is not the same John Henry I was talking about with Denzel Washington. Again, some of them are more religious in tone. The Night Before Christmas, narrated by Meryl Streep. I think some of these we've already noted. Jonah and the Whale, again, more religious in tone. So anyway, I think those are all the ones. And so I'm so glad they made them available. I kept waiting for them to come out in DVD, because like I said, most of these were in VHS form. And I don't think they ever did, sadly, which would have made them at least a little bit more accessible. But I'm glad to see that many of them are now on YouTube for you guys to enjoy, for all of us to enjoy. But again, Pecos Bill by Robin Williams is great. And what's the other one? Paul Bunyan, narrated by the late, great Jonathan Winters. I don't know if you guys know who Jonathan Winters was. He was, an insane comedian, a great influence on Robin Williams. And his narration of that story, if you get a chance to catch that somewhere, is also a lot of fun. So I encourage you to check that out. Just FYI, I'm not going to test you on it or whatever. All right, so I guess that's all I have for today. Good luck on your midterm. If you have any questions about that, let me know before Saturday midnight, because again, Saturday midnight is when I will post the exam and then unpublish everything else. So you'll be kind of on your own. You have all day Sunday. Sunday by midnight is the absolute deadline, absolute deadline. I mean, you can turn it in anytime during Sunday, but it's got to be in by midnight on Sunday, or I will not accept it. And then, as I said, in Monday's lecture, one of the things I will do is I will go over each question and pretty much explain what I was looking for, what constitutes the correct answers, blah, blah, blah. And I'll be in the process of grading them then, but you'll have a pretty good idea of how well you did. And again, if you have any questions about, once you get your exam results back, if you have any questions about those, obviously feel free to ask me about those as well. All right, I guess that's it. Have a wonderful weekend, or have as wonderful a weekend as you can possibly have, given that you have to take a midterm exam for some idiot online. And if you do have some free time, you might want to start reading ahead Charlotte's Web, which is a quick read, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which is a little bit more, well, it's a lot more sophisticated, actually. We're now getting into, the chapter books, starting with fantasy and all the other genres that we're going to cover in the next 4 weeks. We're starting to get into the chapter books, which do take a little bit more time to read. And again, I think the main challenge over the next 4 weeks is to keep up with the reading. Some of you still have presentations to do. Also, I am going to talk about the final paper on Monday's video. So you can start thinking about that and preparing for that. So we still have a lot to do in the last 4 weeks, but I'm trying to space it out as best I can so it's not too overwhelming. But anyway, so again, until Monday's video, good luck with the midterm and see ya. Charlie's not around, so he can't say goodbye to you. Take care, everybody.